Welcome to Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, a production of iHeartRadio and Grim and Mild.
Our world is full of the unexplainable. And if history is an open book, all of these amazing tales are right there on display, just waiting for us to explore. Welcome to the Cabinet of Curiosities. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's a phrase that we've all heard before. And we've also heard the stories of how far some people in history were willing to go for the sake of looking good. But what about how far their looks might take them? Well, for one young woman, beauty turned out to be a ticket to a brand new life. That is, if she could escape her dangerous reality. Rose was born in January of 1824 in a small French village located in the picturesque region of Normandy. But her childhood was far from idyllic. Her father was abusive, and when she was still a young girl, her mother fled home to escape him. So Rose grew up looking out for herself. But as independent as she was still at the mercy of her father's will. When she was just 14 years old, he sold her to a 70-year-old man who bought her to work in his shop. It must have been scary for a teenage girl. But there was one silver lining to all this. The old man's shop was located in Paris. Rose was going to leave her little village behind and head to the big city. Once there, she was immediately put to work, but she didn't want to be a shop girl forever. To her surprise, working her way up in the world didn't turn out to be hard. You see, people in Paris often complimented her appearance, which was new for her. They marveled at her wide, sparkling eyes, her rosy cheeks, pale skin, and thin frame. This was the height of the Victorian era, mind you, when aristocratic women used heavy makeup and tight corsets to emulate a look that Rose just happened to possess naturally. Young men came in and out of the shop every day, most of whom were university students hoping to make their mark on the world. But in a city like Paris, it was hard to stand out, even for someone who had the rare opportunity to earn an education. But in a world of exclusive parties and elite societies, these young men knew that one thing would always help them stand out in a crowd: a beautiful woman at their side. And honestly, Rose knew this too. She quickly learned how to flash a smile to get their attention and then reel them in with a little flirting. She impressed them with her poise and intellect, and within no time she had left the shop behind. Soon enough, Rose met a well-known duke who, like everyone else, was stunned by her beauty and her intellect. He also knew about her past and wanted to help her, so he taught her how to dress like an aristocrat. And honestly, Rose's sense of style came naturally. Once she had mastered the details, like how to layer petticoats or pair a shawl with a parasol, she became a fashion icon. And in Paris, that was saying something. But of course, Rose Alphonsine Plessis was more than just a pretty face. As a final touch, she changed her name to Marie Duplessis, which sounded more refined than her birth name. And this is the change that she needed. By 1847, at the age of just 23, she was viewed as one of the most fashionable women in Paris. However, it wasn't just her glamorous looks and lifestyle that earned her such admiration. You see, long before arriving in Paris, Marie had encountered something dangerous that had changed her and made her more attractive. She had encountered tuberculosis, or TB for short. It was a serious lung infection that had been ravaging Europe, and it was the effects of the disease that had turned her into an icon. Why? Well, people who suffered from TB were seen by many as doomed and romantic. The fever gave victims a rosy complexion and red lips, as well as sparkling eyes. Add in the severe weight loss and the pale skin, and TB created quite the look. And as Victorians were wont to do, they idolized it and copied it. But Marie, even before setting foot in Paris, she had acquired the look the natural way. She gave off that ever-so-attractive sense of frailty and mystique, all thanks to the effects of tuberculosis. Not all stories get a happy ending, though. Marie eventually died from her illness. But rather than move on and forget her, popular culture grieved her with novels and operas in tribute of her. Artists painted her portraits, their attraction to her beauty untouched even by death. So, yes, beauty might very well be in the eye of the beholder. But as Marie's story shows us, beauty can also be a curse. Today, Toronto, Canada is a glistening metropolis, home to world-class food and art, the Toronto International Film Festival, the Stanley Cup, and perhaps most importantly, Keanu Reeves. Back in the 1850s, though, the city had not yet outgrown its frontier town roots. Life was tougher, neighborhoods were rougher, and if a citizen of Toronto needed help, there was no guarantee that they would get it from the city. Say, for instance, that your business caught fire back then. Toronto didn't have a public fire brigade. Most cities didn't, in fact. Instead, the second that smoke started rising, rival firefighting companies would rush to the scene and try to claim that the blaze was theirs, sometimes with disastrous results. Like how in June of 1855, when a fire broke out on Church Street in Toronto, the Hook and Ladder Brigade arrived on the scene first, but didn't fight the fire. Instead, they fought the next fire company that arrived. Firefighters from both sides brawled in the streets and even looted the home that they were supposed to save. The police weren't any better either. Cops were appointed back then, not hired, and often had little to no training. There was almost no accountability, and many ignored orders from their superior officers to do what they wanted. So when the police arrived at the Hook and Ladder fight in 1855, many constables joined in on the brawl. While the police and firefighters fought, the business owners were left to watch their life's work crumble to ashes. The incident was still smoldering in the public's mind when, just a few weeks later, the Hook and Ladders got into trouble once again. On the night of July 12th of 1855, several firemen were patronizing a brothel when a new group of customers arrived. S.B. Howe's circus was in town, and several clowns had come to enjoy the bordello's service. Now, you might be picturing Bozo the Clown walking into a bar, but these clowns were tough customers. When they weren't entertaining crowds, they were performing the difficult labor of putting up tents, building platforms, and keeping the circus safe. It's not entirely clear who set things off or how. Perhaps insults were traded or tempers flared. Most believe that at some point during the night, though, a drunk fireman knocked off a clown's hat. When he refused to apologize, a fight broke out. The clowns emerged victorious, injuring several firefighters and sending the Hook and Ladder boys packing. And I know what you're thinking. A fight between clowns and firemen has to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But you'd be wrong. Upset at being bested by these clowns, the very next day, the firemen launched their counterattack. In Toronto at this time, many public officials, firemen, and police belonged to a Protestant group called the Orange Order. Beyond their political aspirations, Orange Men, as they were called, were also known for their brawling, usually choosing to focus on fighting Catholics. On Friday the 13th of June, however, they went after the circus. The gathering crowd threw stones, overturned wagons, beat up performers, and tore down the big top. When flames broke out and someone rang for the fire brigade, the Hook and Ladders answered the call. They rushed straight past the fires and jumped into the melee. Neither the police chief nor the mayor showing up did anything to stop the violence. It wasn't until the militia arrived that the brawl finally ended. After the Toronto circus riot, city officials tried to do their typical corrupt routine. The police claimed that it was too dark to identify any of the Orangemen who participated in the violence. It was discovered that Police Chief Samuel Sherwood, another Orangeman by the way, delayed sending constables to keep the peace as long as he could. This time, however, the city wanted justice. The riot was the final straw. In response to the public uproar, an inquest was launched into the city police force. For the next few years, city government officials made several attempts to clear out the corrupt police force. 4 years later, in 1859, the entire police force was fired and a new training system was put in place. Many of the fired constables were later rehired, but it marked the beginning of Toronto's efforts to modernize their justice system. In 1874, city-run volunteer firefighting brigades were established in Toronto, leading to the public fire service that they have today. You know, we often fall into the trap of thinking that change must only come through official channels. To revamp a city system, for example, you might have to sign petitions, pass a new law, or even run for office. But it doesn't always have to be that challenging. Sometimes all it takes is a bit of clowning around. I hope you've enjoyed today's guided tour of the Cabinet of Curiosities. Subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or learn more about the show by visiting curiositiespodcast.com. This show was created by me, Aaron Mahnke, in partnership with How Stuff Works. I make another award-winning show called Lore, which is a podcast, book series, and television show. And you can learn all about it over at theworldoflore.com. And until next time, stay curious.